This is Fantawasi from College of Health Sciences, Department of Public Health, lecture not on emergency nutrition. Especially this is chapter 3, supplementary feeding programs. At the end of this chapter, students will be able to understand emergency food security assessments, and second, general food ration, third, selective feeding programs. Under this objective, especially supplementary feeding programs will be seen clearly. And then under this supplementary feeding programs, blanket supplementary feeding program, target supplementary feeding programs, and also what the therapeutic feeding program overview. And this is seen in detail in chapter 4. When it comes to the first objective, which is emergency food security assessment, then the student will be able to understand livelihoods, food security, nutrition security, types of emergency food security assessments, and finally, key indicators used in an emergency food security assessment will be seen clearly and detailed. Let's come to what livelihoods. Livelihoods are defined as combined capabilities, assets, including both material and social resources, and activities required for a means of living linked to survival and future well-being. This is well stated in humanitarian charter and Millennium Standards in disaster response, especially in the SPHERE project in Geneva. And when we see emergency food security assessment, analysis of livelihood security begins with examination of household, especially at individual levels, assets and livelihood strategies. What's by itself, an asset mean by itself? It can be defined as anything that is considered valuable or useful, such as skill, quality, in person, so on and so forth. In the sustainable livelihood framework, assets defined under 6 categories. The first one is human. And when you look at the human assets, health, nutrition, status, physical capacity, skills, level of education, and so on and so forth will be addressed. When you come to the second one, it's social, especially at household, gender, kinship, and other networks, community groups, values, attitudes, skills will be seen under this strategy. And the third one is financial, in terms of income, credit, loan, savings, liquid assets, so on and so forth. And the fourth one is physical, it's productive assets, such as tools and equipment, stores, housing, stock, and infrastructure issue also raised here. And the fifth one is natural, like that of land, water, forests. And the final is political, especially in power relationship, access, and to influence over local and high level of government processes. And there are 6 principles central to livelihood strategies in crisis response special. The first one is rigorous assessment, and the second one, appropriate market support. The third, protecting essential assets. The fourth is easing vulnerable people's burden. And the fifth one, timely intervention, especially this designed in our country, Ethiopia, as contextual and increasing protection for population at risk of displacement. These principles can be guide the need for a shift from project-driven approach to system response that addresses the underlying cause of famine, especially. Let us come to what food security is the second objective of this chapter. When we say food security, every man, woman, and child has the inalienable right to be free from hunger. This is stated in the First World Conference Declaration at Rome. And also in First Millennium Development Goal, there was a concept which is eradicate extreme poverty and hunger. It's still continue in Sustainable Development Goal as part of it. And this World Food Summit and FAO will define the food security. It exists when all peoples at all times have physical, economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food to meet their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. Household food security exists when all members at all times have access to enough food for an active and healthy life. And food security has significant pillars. These pillars are classified into ways. The first one is based on the WHO standard. There are 3 pillars that determine food security. The first one is food availability, second, food access, and the third one is food utilization. And in another way, in 2009, the World Summit Food Security Status the 4 pillars of food security. In addition to WHO concepts, it's added the stability is the fourth one, and let us look in detail each of them. The first one is food availability. What is the food availability? When we say the food availability, it talks about the physical preference of food in the area of concern to all forms of domestic production, commercial imports, and food aid. And food availability related to food supplies, food production, distribution, and exchange. What production by itself? It's determined by a variety of factors, including land ownership and use, soil management, crop selection, breeding and management, livestock breeding and management, and harvesting itself. So when it comes to the distribution one, it involves storage, processing, transport, packaging, and marketing of food. It might be aggregated at the regional, national, district, and community level, not only within that specific areas. And the second one is food access. It concerns households' ability to acquire repeat amounts of food through one or more combination of all home production in stocks, purchase, barter, gifts, borrowing, and food aid. These detailed elements of the food access will be exampled as follows. Home production means cropping, stock, and so on, hunting, fishing, and gathering of wild foods. So the coolest in our country, Ethiopia. And the third one is purchasing, market, shops, and so forth, but exchange of items of food, especially in ancient ways. This is gift from friends, relatives, community, government agencies, and so on. So food may be available, but not accessible to certain households if they can't acquire a sufficient quantity or diversity of food. Through this mechanism, they'll be in a state of insecurity. And the third one is food utilization. This is the final for the WHO definition, but it's just full in World Summit. So anyways, it is the metabolism of food by individuals. It concerns about the bioavailability. So access to healthcare is another determinant of food utilization in the health of individual controls, how the food is metabolized. For example, intestinal parasites can take nutrients from the body and decrease food utilization. Sanitation also decrease the occurrence and spread of diseases that can affect food utilization. Education about nutrition and counseling service about nutrition, about the preparation, can impact on the utilization and also improve this food security. And when it comes to the final one, which is food stability, it refers to the ability to obtain food over time. And instability in markets resulting in food price can cause transitory food insecurity, which is temporal. Other factors that can temporarily cause food insecurity are loss of employment or productivity, which can be caused by illness. And then seasonal food insecurity can result from the regular pattern of growing season in food production. When you summarize these pillars, if these are not fulfilled, a person said to be in the state of insecurity. The first one is availability, which is the domestic production, import, capacity, food store, food aid. Second, access, poverty might be the factor in the purchasing power, in transport and market infrastructure, for distribution. We come to the utilization, food safety and quality, clean water, health and sanitation care and feeding, desired nutritional outcome. And the stability, with the variability of prices, fluctuation, political factor, and economic factor will be affected. This pictorial representation is a finalization of these pillars. If they are not fulfilled, a person will be in a state of food insecurity. So if a person is exposed for food insecurity, it can be two ways. The first one is transitory food insecurity. Food may be unavailable during a certain period of time. It might be due to natural disasters like that of floods, volcanic eruption, earthquakes, and tsunamis. And the second one is chronic or Permanent food insecurity is defined as a long-term persistent lack of adequate food. For example, households are constantly at risk of being unable to acquire food to meet the needs of all members of the household. Let us come to our country context, and we'll see this in detail based on the area classification in urban and rural ways. Let us start from the transitory food insecurity, especially in rural one. Thus, resource-poor households vulnerable to shocks, especially in droughts, and farmers and other in droughts, prone areas, pastoralists, other vulnerable to economic shocks, especially in low potential areas, will be exposed. When it comes to an urban context, urban poor vulnerable to economic shocks, especially those causing food price rises. In other ways, like that of group affected by temporal civil unrest. When it comes to the chronic one, resource-poor households, especially in rural areas, in landless or land-scarce households, poor pastoralists, female-headed households, elder, disabled, and sick peoples, poor non-agricultural households, newly established sites will be exposed for this kind of insecurity. When it comes to in urban areas, low-income households employed in informal sector, especially those outside the labor market, elderly, disabled, and sick. Some female-headed households, stressed children are exposed for chronic food insecurity. In other case, like that of refugees and displaced people, especially this is prevalent in our context nowadays. So let us come to the food insecurity factors, especially internal drivers. The first one is inherent or natural food, water scarcity, land degradation, low growth on agricultural use, population growth, poverty, and malnutrition. And there are also worsening factors like that of high prices on the commodity market, lack of investments, governance issues, and land cravings, lack of regional cooperation in conflicts, migration, and climate change also one of the worsening factors for food insecurity. If there is food insecurity, what will be its effect? The effect will be seen one way, and it will be divided into three. And the first one is stunting and chronic nutritional deficiencies. This is the biggest problem that will be resulted due to food insecurity. And chronic hunger and malnutrition by decreasing body size, known as medical terms stunting. It adversely affects health in three ways. The first one is premature failure of vital organ occurs during adulthood. For example, a 50-year-old individual might be heart failure because his or her heart suffered structural defects during early development, especially within the first 1,000 days. Now, the typical nutritional intervention areas in our country context also. The second one is stunted individuals suffer a far higher rate of disease and illness than those who are not undergone stunting. Third, severe malnutrition in early childhood often leads to defects in cognitive development. Not only cognitive development, by the way, its physical development will be affected, especially within the first 2 years, can be decreased within 11 centimeters. Checked in scientific studies. So if it is talking about food security, let us come to the nutrition security. What is nutrition security? It's a broader concept that refers to access of individuals to nutrients and their utilization for optimal health. This is a broader one than that of the food security. So food security is an element for nutrition security. And this approach addresses three prolonged factors like food, care, and health. These are the pillars of nutrition security, comprising a framework called food, care, and health framework. So the food and nutrition security conceptual framework will be seen. What's conceptual framework by itself? It's a theoretical structure of assumptions, principles, and rules that holds together in ideas, comprising a broad concept, group of concepts that broadly define, systematically organized to provide a focus, rational, and tool for integration and interpretation of information. There are different conceptual frameworks developed by different institutions. But for this session, we'll see one commonest conceptual framework which is designed by UNICEF for malnutrition, especially for undernutrition of children. Totally, this framework have three main causes. The first one is immediate cause. This immediate cause might be resulted either the disease or inadequate dietary intake, and also the vice versa will cause this undernutrition. The disease might cause the inadequate intake, or the inadequate dietary intake may cause the disease. Then those both of the immediate factors will be resulted children at an undernutrition, and this undernutrition will be consequence as disease, disability, or death. And the second one is underlying cause, like that of inadequate access to food or inadequate care for mothers and children. And the third one, inadequate healthy services in an unhealthy environment might result also. These three underlying causes leads for the immediate cause, either for disease or for inadequate dietary intake, especially the middle that shares both of the underlying cause, inadequate care for mothers and children, not only nutritional services, but the other health services inadequacy might lead the maternal and child for immediate causes, a favorable environment for the immediate causes. And the third one is the basic cause. Especially this has happened at national or country or regional or worldwide level. And there are potential resources like that of economy, political, and ideological system, resource and control, human economic organizational issues. So especially inadequate education is one of these basic problems, and there are interventions that are designed for those causes. For the first immediate causes, there are nutritional surveillance or nutritional survey issues, and there will be direct nutrients provision, like that of supplementation, especially in our country context, the vitamin supplementation or deworming, which is designed biannual, but nowadays it's changing to in past 3 months in some contexts, and also it is conducted as routine services in food fortification also, like that of iodine, which is addressed in our country context at individual levels through common salt consumption in the form of iodine fortification, and feeding programs, especially in emergency feeding programs. There are therapeutic feeding programs, and also in general ration forms based on the area prioritization, and nutritional counseling issues, especially in healthcare systems. There are essential nutrition action activities that are conducted starting from antenatal care up to close monitoring and promotion services, and also the delivery and postnatal care, immunization. On such contact points, there are interventions that are conducted to alleviate the immediate and underlying causes. When it comes to basic causes, education is one of the power and equal opportunity for either urban or rural or poorest or richest. So these equity services should have conducted in healthcare system, market access, food aid, and good governance, economic development plans, grants, livestock production, trade policies, human rights, including food and nutrition. These are the interventions that are carried out. When you summarize it, the immediate causes are mostly happened at individual level, and the underlying cause occurred at household level. The basic one is at country level. So when it comes to the food and nutrition security levels also, it can be seen as macro and micro, especially in macro level, the underlying in the immediate cause, which has happened at household and individual level, and the rest, which is the basic one, is starting from national, regional, and worldwide level. So the intervention is designed based on that issue. When it comes to the challenge of achieving food security, there is a global water crisis is the first one, the second land degradation, the third one land use, and fourth climate change. The fifth one is agricultural disease, and the sixth dictatorship and kleptocracy, and the seventh one is food sovereignty, independence state, and the eighth one is demographic issue. Encountering global water crisis regionally, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, has the largest number of water-stressed countries of any other place on the globe, and as of stated, 8 million people who live in Africa. When it comes to the land degradation, about 40% of the world's agricultural land is seriously degraded. And the climate change is affecting food production patterns in many places, regions, and countries more vulnerable to food insecurity. So when it comes to the demographic challenges, it's population urbanization, insecurity, and conflict stemming from urban areas, and mostly from developing countries need more room for better food and need for good infrastructure and good governance. So risk of food security, the population growth, fossil fuel production, hybridization, genetic engineering, loss of biodiversity, intellectual property rights, prices in international relations are mentioned. So when there is food security and children, this is the reading assignment. Let us come to the emergency food security assessment types. The first one is rapid initial assessment, the second survey, and the third one is surveillance. When it comes to rapid initial assessment, we should have to focus on the origin of the problem. The first one, harvest failure, civil unrest, increased food prices, it may be population movement or logistic constraints. After affecting the population, how many people are affected, who is the most vulnerable group, how the different socio-economic groups are affected. And we should also focus on the logistical problems, especially the areas, security issue, roads, availability of roads, skills available in the affected or refugee population, and also the mortality issue, infant mortality, child mortality, crude death rate, and malnutrition, especially in under 5 years. Also should have to focus in surveys of at least 200 households by using anthropometric and clinical metrics nutritional assessments like that of data, weight, mark, and edema. Questions about the previous month's days and cause of death, distance of water supply also should have to be seen, and mapping graph number of people, structure of the settlement. The interview will be done on health professionals or community health workers, like that of health development team leaders and local authorities based on the structure. When you summarize it, the rapid assessment objective is to verify the existence or threat of nutritional emergency. Second, to estimate the number of people affected. Third, to establish immediate needs, or to identify local resources available. Then finally, to identify external resources available. And data collection methods will be direct observation or review of records from available feeding centers and or health facilities, especially the feeding programs, through focus group discussion or interviews with key informants or review of records. And it might be quantitative or longitudinal ways. And when it comes to the survey, it's to establish the prevalence of malnutrition and also to identify likely causes for this prevalence of malnutrition. It might be conducted by cluster sample survey of under 5s, and it can add also sometimes women who are pregnant and lactating, and also if necessary older children will be participators there. When it comes to the surveillance one, to identify the trends in nutritional status, especially in continuous appraisal, and repeated survey may be conducted, and growth monitoring and promotion may be also done, and central site surveillance will be also included. During this method of assessment, there are indicators that are used, especially there are three main category of indicators incorporated in emergency food security assessment. The first one is mortality indicator. The second one, nutritional status indicator, and the third one is food security indicator. When it comes to the mortality indicator, crowd mortality rate, less than 1 day per 10,000 people per day, its significance is reasonable health situation. When the crowd mortality rate is 1 up to 2 days per 10,000 people per day, it's elevated mortality. When it's greater than 2 days per 10,000 people per day, it's health emergency significances and in emergency situation. And when it comes to the nutritional indicators, especially focus on the anthropometric in the clinical one. When it comes to the anthropometric, there are the problems. There are 3 main problems: that stunting, wasting, and underweight. It's indices for the stunting indices: height for age, which is chronic; weight for head, which is acute or wasting; and underweight, it's a composite indicator, weight for age. It's a combination of two stunting and wasting. So let us in detail at individual level. When we say wasting, it's low weight for height, especially it's a GAM, global acute malnutrition, when the less than -2 Z-score, and SAM, which is severe acute malnutrition, weight for age less than -Z-square. MAM, which when we see -2 and between -2 and 2 Z-square, -2 Z-square. When it comes to the public health significance, it's a benchmark at the population level based on the WHO. When GAM is less than 5, it's acceptable. When GAM is 5 up to 9, it is poor. GAM 10 to 14, it's serious. I think we are here in serious situation. And GAM greater than and equal to 15, it's critical. So totally, it's public health significance indicators the increasing of risk, morbidity, and mortality of children. When it comes to the stunting, which is a chronic one, the level of cutoff point is the same. The level of cutoff point is the same. GCM means global chronic malnutrition. So its Z-square is like that of the wasting, less than -2, and severe chronic malnutrition, which is less than Z-square, and moderate chronic malnutrition between -3 and -2 Z-squares. When it comes to the public health significance of the benchmarks prevalence at the population level based on the WHO, stunting less than 20% acceptable, and when it is 20 up to 29 is poor. When it's 30 up to 39, serious. So we are in serious situations, especially in mini demographic 2019 with the updated information. We are around 38, so we are in critical, but for the last 2 decades, we are in critical situations because we are around 40. And increased risk of morbidity and mortality, it also decreased performance at school level, especially this since it is stunting. And when it comes to the composite indicator, which is underweight, low weight for age, based on the standard, and the level of the indicators are the same like that of the previous. So let us come to the public health significance. Underweight less than 10, which is acceptable, and 10 to 19, which is poor and serious. Also a critical issue is raised here, which indicates the risk of morbidity. When it comes to the MOAC also, it's updated since it's based on the WHO. It's updated from the previous one, global MOAC less than 11.5 centimeters, severe MOAC less than 11.5 centimeters, also moderate 11.5 up to 12.5 centimeters. It's updated and changed. This is for about women's. In children, it's a risk of mortality. When in women, it's also risk of low birth weight babies, indicates that this public health significance. In case of adults, we use BMI. These are the level of indicators, and this also the public health significance. So you can read it. When it comes to the food security indicators, This is based on food and nutrition security measurements. It can be done from the individual at global level. There are selected indicator of measurements. This will be the reading assignment. The first one is the food composition score, and the second one household income and expenditure, third household food access scale. The fourth one is the FAO indicators for undernourishment. The fifth one is the global hunger index, and the sixth one the global food security index. The seventh one the poverty in hunger index, and the eighth one the hunger eradication commitment index, and the 9 anthropometric indicators we have to indicate this one, and the dietary diversity score. It's made to be at individual or children level. So anyways, this is the reading assignment in detail, and let us see the commonest one, which have done for individuals and for children. Especially for children, there are 7 food groups based on the FANTA or the USAID or the WHO standards. This minimum dietary diversity acceptance will be most commonly at least 4 and above. If that is below, there it is not diversified utilization of the food groups. And this is about women. This is also one of the reading assignment issue. So let us come to the food and nutrition intervention during emergency situations. Food and nutrition intervention usually aimed at fulfilling few or all of the following objectives. 1, to save lives, to maintain or improve health, nutritional status. Third one is to preserve productive assets. And the fifth one, to prevent mass migration. The sixth, ensure access to adequate diet for all population groups. 7, to establish conditions for promote rehabilitation and restoration of self-reliance. The last one is to minimize damage to food production and marketing system due to emergency nutrition. And when the impact of an emergency on nutritional status, there are triggers like that of natural disasters based on flood, drought, earthquake, war, political and economic shock. Its impact on population might be destruction of the infrastructure like that of roads, markets, and large scale of migration, breakdown of essential services, health, water, and sanitation, loss of poverty in businesses, house, land, animals, stock, and social disruptions. When impact on the household, it's lack access to land, reduced access to food, residence in overcrowded settlements, lack of wash, loss of earnings and access to health services, families separated. And when it's impact on individuals, either the malnutrition or the disease, which is the immediate causes that we have seen, then finally the disease will be happened. So before this is occurring, there is nutrition emergency interventions. Due to these consequences, the most pressing and single most important response in disaster emergencies, food and nutrition intervention. Its main aim is to ensure that disaster affected communities receive adequate food in terms of quality and quantity, as well as proper nutritional care and services. So there are modalities that food and nutrition intervention deliver. The first one is general food distribution. The second one is selective feeding programs. These selective feeding programs are main focus for this course. And supplementary feeding programs. Under supplementary feeding programs, targeted supplementary feeding programs, and blanket supplementary feeding programs. And also based on the selective feeding program, there are therapeutic feeding programs, especially in one chapter. It's discussed in chapter 4 also. When it comes to the general food distribution, there's adequate food in quantity and quality, nutritional support to all members of the disaster-affected community. The initiation must be based on the context. In case of rapid onset disasters where livelihoods are completely disrupted, or when people are dislocated and settled in camps, it must be initiated immediately. In case of slow onset disasters such as droughts, thorough analysis of trend, severity, and cause of food deprivation must be analyzed, and appropriately food intervention should be conducted. It's initiated when one or more of the following conditions are present. There is unusual severe decline in food availability or affordability, when coping mechanisms will be insufficient, when there is a high prevalence of malnutrition cause must be arise, and it's initiated when GAM is greater than 15%, meaning global acute malnutrition is greater than 15%, or it is 10 to 15 with aggravating factors, that is critical alert. And when you come to the second one, selective feeding, this supplementary feeding, it's the provision of foods in addition to general food ration to vulnerable groups of population. It can be done in one of the following, either in blanket feeding program or targeting feeding program. What's blanket feeding program? When food for all vulnerable groups of the disaster affecting communities in form of blanket. When you come to target, is a provision of supplementary foods for moderately malnourished individuals in the community. This is based on the anthropometric measurement also. Let us come to for supplementary feeding program in detail. At the end of it reduce risk of mortality and morbidity associated with MAM, to rehabilitate at risk of individuals and to prevent further deterioration in nutritional status. Third, to provide a protection ration for individuals discharged from therapeutic feeding programs and thus prevent relapse of severe acute malnutrition. Fourth, to rehabilitate pregnant and lactating women who are at risk or moderately malnourished to improve maternal nutritional status and minimize the risk of infants born with low birth weight. To provide nutritional or health education message for beneficiaries or caregivers and hence increase awareness. When you come to the types of supplementary feeding programs, as stated earlier, let us come to the blanket supplementary feeding programs. Its main aim is to prevent deterioration in nutritional status of the population and to reduce the potential prevalence of acute malnutrition and micronutrient deficiency, to reduce excess morbidity and mortality among those at risk. And the category of vulnerable groups include in the blanket feeding supplementary 6 to 23, 24, up to 35, 36, up to 59 months, totally 6 up to 59 months, and pregnant and lactating was elderly. It should be identified with the consultation with the community members will depend on the availability of resources and the need of the interventions. If resources limited, its focus should have to be 6 up to 23 months in the defined geographical areas. The anthropometric measurements are not usually taken in blanket supplementary feeding programs. Instead of it, our business is the vulnerable group. So even if it's however advised that whenever it is possible, anthropometric measurement should be taken because this is facilitates the correct referral of individuals for mom and son, not only for the blanket supplementary feeding programs. So when we to start the blanket supplementary feeding programs, we are not starting haphazardly, but we have the criteria that we should have to start it. It may be one or more of the following combination circumstances that are forced or lead us to start it. At the onset of an emergency in general food distribution, systems are not adequately in place. Second, problems in the delivering or distributing the general ration. Third, prevalence of GAM greater than or equal to 15, but in case of general food ration, it's greater than 15, but here it might be equal or greater than. And prevalence of GAM is 10 to 14%, acute malnutrition in the presence of aggravating factors, anticipating increased rate of malnutrition due to seasonal induced epidemics. In case of micronutrient deficiency outbreaks, to provide micronutrient rich food to the target populations. There are initial criteria, and these criteria, it is not really on anthropometric indicators. It's defined target groups. It's based on defined target groups like 6 out to 23 months or 6 to 59 months or all pregnant and lactating women. It's normal operates for a period of 3 up to 6 months after the situation has stabilized, it's closed and those registered are discharged. There's treatment follow-up. Register all individuals within the defined target group for the blanket supplementary feeding program. Screen the individuals by measuring MOAC and assessing for bilateral pitting edema. This screening is conducted to identify cases who may require referral for some management, not for this purpose. Provide a 2-week surplus specialized nutrition source to all those registered for blanket supplementary feeding program. Monitor individuals' nutritional status by measuring MOAC and assign for bilateral pitting edema during each biweekly follow-up visits. Ensure provision of other health services such as vitamin supplementation, deworming, insecticide treatment, water purification tablets, and health and nutrition counseling services also. When you should close it, this blanket supplementary feeding program should be closed when GAN is below 15% or with no aggravating factor, 10% with aggravating factors, and the following are made. 1. The general food distribution is reliable and adequate, or food security is acceptable. Effective public health and disease control measures are in place. No seasonal deterioration of nutritional status is expected. The population size is stable with no displacements expected. There is availability and access to water, sanitation, and hygiene facilities. Nutrition sensitive interventions are in place. So let us come to the second supplementary feeding program types, which is targeted supplementary feeding. This should be integrated with the routine health service and OTP services where possible. Its main aim is 1. To treat patients with MAM and prevent deterioration from MAM to SAM, prevent mortality associated with MAM, prevent deterioration in maternal nutritional status, and subsequently prevent poor birth outcomes. Most commonly, children 6 to 59 months and pregnant and lactating women are targeted, but other vulnerable groups such as adolescents, elderly people with chronic disease, disabled can also be targeted. The decision to start targeted supplementary feed is based on the finding of the nutritional surveys. For planning purposes, determining the number of children to be included in the targeted supplementary feeding program is important and can be calculated as total population, percentage of under 5 years, percent of malnourished from the total under 5 children. When to start targeted supplementary feeding program? This should be implemented when one of the following situations occur. The first one is the large number of malnourished individuals, prevalence of 10 to 14% acute malnutrition among children, and there are a large number of children predicted to become malnourished due to factors like poor food security and high rates of disease prevalence of 5 to 9% of acute malnutrition in the presence of aggravating factors. This severity of acute malnutrition is calculated from GAN. There are procedures to determine the course of intervention, check for visible signs of malnutrition and any medical complications, sign of common infections. If individual is medically unwell, refer to the nearest state facility for further assessment and appropriate treatment. For children without medical complication, check for edema and measure anthropometric. If the individual is severely malnourished or if bilateral pitting edema is present, refer to the nearest state facility providing targeted therapeutic feeding program, either OTP or ASC. For those children without edema or without medical complication, analyze the anthropometric indicators using the WHO reference tables to determine the score in MOAC status to appropriate. For healthy children or green, those who are raised at the green areas, praise the caregiver and provide nutrition counseling, including the use of milk products where possible and send to the child at home. For those mom children without any other complications, I need to target supplementary feeding program. For some children at rate with appetite and without complication, I refer to OTP. For some children with Complications rate refer to the nearest TFU or SC. The admission criteria and entry category of target supplementary feeding program. The admission criteria is children 6 to 59 months, more greater than or equal to 11.5 to less than 12.5 centimeter, weight for head or weight for length greater than or equal to -3 to less than -2 z-score, no bilateral pitting edema, discharged or cured children from OTP for 2 months to prevent relapse, and no medical complications, clinically well and alert, pregnant and lactating woman, whose mark is less than 23 centimeter, will be admitted. The entry category might be either new admission or readmission, relapse, returned, defaulters, transferring. Is detailed definition can read here. When it comes to the step, the first step is taking anthropometric measurements and confirm nutritional status. And the second one is admitted to the, if that is fulfilled, will be admitted to the target supplementary feeding programs. And there are medical treatments and cares. The medicines that are given during this program is either albendazole, levendazole, or measles vaccination on admission. Albendazole on admission for those children who are 24 up to 59 months, 400 milligram dose, and the prescription is single dose on admission. The levendazole is the same, but its dose is 500 milligram, and the measles will be given for those children 9 to 59 months based on the national API guideline. Routine medication and treatment for pregnant and lactating mothers. On this program, also albendazole or levendazole. The time, especially, it might be at the end of the second and the third trimesters. For those pregnant and lactating women, the dose is the same for those children, and the prescription is especially at admission, if not already received in antenatal care or postnatal care. When it comes to the nutritional rehabilitation, there are a range of specialized nutritious foods used for nutrition rehabilitation of patients with fortified blended food, especially super cereal, pulse, and ready-to-use supplementary food are the two types of specialized nutritious foods used for management of MAM in Ethiopia. Ideally, RUCF is used for nutrition rehabilitation of children with MAM. If not available, fortified blended food is given. When it comes to the ration size per patient, children 6 to 59 months, daily quantity 200 grams. For ration for 2 weeks, 3 kilograms, and ration for 1 month, 6 kilograms. For those pregnant or lactating mothers, 250 grams. For 2 weeks, 3.75 kilograms, and for 1 month, 7.5 kg. When it comes to the health, nutrition, and hygiene counseling issue, the ration is for patients with MAM. Don't share with the rest of the family. This is the critical problem. Don't give fortified blended food to infants below 6 months. This should be exclusively breastfed. If the child is 6 to 23 months, continue to breastfeed on demand. Mother's milk is best for infants and young children, especially until 2 years. And fortified blended food should be consumed in addition to, and not as a substitute for the household diet and breastfeeding. Include the fortified blended food porridge is consumed within 30 minutes of cooking. This will avoid contamination. Once the fortified blended food has been prepared, the remainder should be stored in closed bag in cold, dry, and hygienic place away from the insects or rodents. This figure shows the demonstration of hand washing practices during the preparation of fortified blended foods. So wash hands thoroughly using water and soap. And the second one is wash utensils with soap and water. If the water to be used for preparation is not clean, safe drinking water, it should be boiled for 15 to 20 minutes before adding this fortified blended foods. So this is how to mix and how to prepare the porridge. You can read it. And this also the ration size per patient of reduced supplementary feeding programs. Daily in 1 sachet, for 2 weeks 15 sachets, for 1 month 13 sachets. And this is how to use it. Gently mix by pressing the sachet for 30 seconds. Make small opening in the corner of the sachet. The patient can eat directly from the sachet. Drink clean, safe drinking water while eating the RUCF to keep the hydrated. If the child is breastfeeding, continue to offer breast milk on demand. This is a complementary. It's a complementary to the normal meals, not a replacement. Therefore, should be consumed between normal meals and continue consuming other nutritious foods during the treatment. That is the IYCF part should have to practice it since it's not a replacement. And the functional and compositional differences on the food blended, the fortified blended food and the reduced supplementary feeding is reading assignment. When it comes to the monitoring during the targeted supplementary feeding programs, follow-up visits, always the anthropometric measurement should have to be done. If it's at health center, even can be done at the community level, and the presence of bilateral eating edema, weight gain, patients who lose weight and don't weight or have weight fluctuation should receive special attention during home visit. Inform the caregiver or patient on the progress of the treatment, and also conduct individual or group counseling on health and WASH and IYCF. Home visits for patients requiring special attention. Transfer to OTP for patients whose nutritional status deteriorates to some, even it might be further to ASC also. And we should have, there may be failure to respond to treatment, so we should have to focus on HIV or AIDS or TB, maybe the underlying cause of the acute malnutrition. It's recommended that the patients who are failing to respond to treatments are offered HIV counseling and testing, and TB testing. Other reasons for failure to respond to treatment may include problems with the application of the protocol, home and social circumstance of the individuals, and excessive sharing of the targeted supplementary feeding program ration may be the reason, since not applicable to the intended objective. The discharge criteria and exit categories. Children 6 to 59 months, if parameter based on mark, discharge cured when mark greater than or equal to 0.5 centimeter for quantitative visits, and clinically well endowed. If it's based on the weight for weight or weight for length, discharge cured when weight for weight or weight for length greater than or equal to -2 z squared for quantitative visits, and clinically well endowed. Pregnant woman in lactating woman, more greater than or equal to 3 centimeters for consecutive visits, or lactating mother whose infant reaches 6 months of age. This is the exit category and definition of terms. It's better to read it. This is all about the procedures when we close the target supplementary feeding program. General food distribution is adequate or meets planned nutritional requirements. One, control measures for infectious diseases are effective. Deterioration in nutritional situations anticipated. In some situations where prevalence of acute malnutrition is below 5% in presence of aggravating factors, or 10% without aggravating factors, but the absolute number of malnourished children may still be considerable. The closure of the targeted supplementary feeding program may not be appropriate. The same may apply in unstable and insecure situations where this programs may be maintained as safety nets. When it comes to summarize it, blanket supplementary feeding is provided to everyone in an identified vulnerable group for a defined period, for example, children 6 to 59 months or all pregnant and lactating women, regardless of their nutritional status. Anthropometric indicators are not used to determine those admitted or discharged from the treatment. However, beneficiaries are screened to identify those in need of some treatment. When it comes to the target supplementary feeding, individuals with moderate acute malnutrition in specific vulnerable groups. The vulnerable groups usually include children 6 to 15 years and pregnant women with infants under 6 months of age who have MAM. So there is a need of anthropometric measurements. It might also include individuals with special needs, such as people living with HIV, tuberculosis patients, and the older people with MAM-specific anthropometric criteria to determine those admitted and discharged from the treatment is mandatory. When you summarize the criteria for deciding the type or the combination of selective feeding programs, when GAM is greater than 15%, it is serious. And when GAM also 10 to 14% in presence of aggravating factors, it needs blanket supplementary feeding program. When GAM is 10 to 14% and GAM 5 to 19% in presence of aggravating factors, it's at stage of alert and it needs targeted supplementary feeding program. If GAM is 5 to 9 with no aggravating factors and GAM is less than 5% in presence of aggravating factors, it's acceptable. It's in the normal range. So we are saying so many times aggravating factors. What are the? This might be the nutrition situation worsening issue. The general food ration is below the mean energy, protein, and fat requirements. When epidemic measles or whooping cough, high prevalence of respiratory tract infections, and so forth. Thank you for your attention.